Good evening and welcome to a New Year's Eve like no other. We can't go out, you can't go out, so we thought we'd do a little Q&A. I suppose to get you in, it's not the festive spirit, the New Year's spirit. I'm joined by Bastani and Dalia. Gebrial, how are you both doing?
Very well, Michael.
Very well, everything considering.
I assume neither of you have big plans for the evening?
No, I plan on drinking the memory of 2020 out of my brain. So, and that will be happening within the confines of my home.
I was gonna have like a cocktail ready for this show, but I've got a green tea, which is very way to end 2020, isn't it? Aaron, what are your plans saying?
I'm probably just going to go for a light jog later. Probably after this, I'll probably go for a light jog, and then I'm going to cook dinner for my partner and I. I bought some guanciale, which is pig cheek for a proper carbonara. And I know the vegan Novara Media supporters are not going to like that. I'm a meat minimizer. Look, I want synthetic meat, cultured meat to come to market as soon as possible. But there's the occasional meal where if it's organic and it's got good animal rights standards, I will eat it. And this is one of those occasions.
Veganism came up actually on our last Q&A stream. So we should say, if you are militantly vegan, but you want to support novaramedia.com, novaramedia.com/support, just leave a note on it and we'll make sure it only goes to Gary. Gary is the vegan in the building. So you can make sure that none of your hard-earned cash is going to buy animal products. We are going to be taking your questions from the super chats, from Instagram. If you don't already follow us on Instagram, do it. There's no reason not to. You have no excuse. We've already had a super chat from Martin J. Shrewsbury with £50. Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you.
Cheers for that.
Fox has collected me some questions from the Instagram from this afternoon, so we're going to start off with a quick fire of these. Now, I thought Fox was going to collect some stupider ones for us, but these are all quite significant, hard questions. So we're going to start off with a kind of quick fire. I'm going to go one question for each of you. Eve Blaine on Instagram asks, what's the most effective way to make individual political change going into 2021? Dalia.
Well, no political change really happens on a purely individual level. So I would say that the best thing that you can do is join whatever collective is politically relevant and salient in your area, and that area can be geographic, like locally, like your local renting housing association, well, not official housing association, but like housing campaign or migrants' rights campaign, or it could mean within your field of work, trade union work. So whatever you feel like is your kind of space where you have a vision politically, join or create the collective that is going to make change in that.
I liked your challenging the terms of the question. That was good. They asked what individual change they can make. You said it's not about individual change. It's very wise. Aaron, One Love on our YouTube asks, do you think we will see a Labour leadership challenge in 2021?
No, absolutely no chance of that. And I don't want it to happen. Keir Starmer's won the leadership fair and square democratically. He deserves a fair crack of the whip. I don't like a lot of the things he's done. I'm worried about the complete absence of policy. But I don't think it's a wise thing for the left to be demanding a leadership challenge. No, we have local elections in May. If Labour do pretty well, then I think basically both Starmer's kind of Europhile, and of course there are a lot more of those after the events of the last couple of days, critics and the left, I think will have to get in line to some extent, especially if it looks like he'll form a government. You know, there's nothing that brings people together politically as winning, as we're seeing right now with the Conservative Party around Brexit. There are a great deal of disagreements among them. However, if it goes badly, then Keir Starmer has problems, because the bet his leadership has made is that we don't need members. We're going to get money from donors. We don't need mass canvassing because we're going to get better coverage from the mainstream media. That may be accurate. We're going to find out. I don't think it's entirely correct. I think you ideally want the best of both, right? And I think right now he's looking at zero sum. We'll get rid of one and we'll get in the other. So if it goes badly, then that will undermine the kind of core assumptions behind his leadership going into 2024. But there shouldn't be a leadership campaign. No, the left should be isolating the candidates it wants as parliamentary candidates for the next general election, elevating good people into local government, getting them in as councillors across the country. Those should be the priorities, not being fixated on one guy who's at the top of the Labour Party.
I just got to say, I just saw flash up on the screen, 20 quid from Juliet Jakes. obviously host of a fantastic podcast, Sweet 212. But also, I saw on Twitter today, she is in the semi-finals of University Challenge this evening. So thank you for the donation and good luck. I assume it's pre-recorded. I've got no idea actually. So either good luck in the past or good luck this evening. Anyway, I hope you get or got into the final. Dalia, question for you is: Samir Segal on Instagram asks, greatest Prime Minister, greatest Labour leader?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I mean, purely just because his politics align with mine the most, I would have to say Jeremy as my favorite leader. Obviously, there are like so many reasons why he, and I think obviously we know a lot of the kind of big picture reasons why his leadership didn't work out, and that there are some kind of like personal reasons that he is accountable to as well, like individual reasons that he is accountable to as well. But he is one of very few voices in the Labour Party historically and contemporarily who have really had a very transnational idea of justice and a real sense of solidarity, like of international solidarity throughout his that resonates throughout his politics. And I think that's what he was punished for. And I think that it was meaningful anyway to have someone like that win on such a high mandate, because I think it shows that the politics that he's historically represented are really popular, and it got clouded and mired in the kind of dirty game of actual politics, and that is something that should be reckoned with, like, seriously. But that doesn't change the fact that I think the fact that he got that mandate in 2015, and then in 2017 shows that internationalism is not actually as much of a liability as a lot of lobby journalists would have you think. In terms of best Labour, in terms of best Prime Minister, I guess I have to say Clement Attlee, because he brought in the NHS and like went and was able to kind of push against ideas of austerity following a war, following crisis, and make a case for investment in people. I would say that he was also a raving, an imperialist, and many holes in that. But his ability to pull off the NHS, which now we take for granted as a popular institution, but at the time there was significant, powerful interests that did not want the establishment of something like the NHS. And the fact he was able to pull that off, and we haven't really been able to do anything like that since, tells me that there's obviously something to learn there.
Aaron, what is it, do you concur? Jeremy Corbyn and Attlee as your Labour leader and Prime Minister?
No. I think my favourite Prime Minister has to be Harold Wilson, because, again, not perfect. I think it's a really tough question. There's you could say none of them.
Yeah, I mean, that is my primary answer.
Yeah, I think Harold Wilson, because Britain didn't go into Vietnam. And I think actually, if you look at the long durée of British foreign policy since 1945, that is the exception across both parties. And there's a lot to be said for that. And it wasn't, of course, down to him. It was down to a number of factors, but he was the Prime Minister. Also, he won, or Labour were first in 4 general elections with him as leader. And I just like to say to people, Tony Blair won 3 times, while Harold Wilson won 4 times. So, there are other figures to talk about in Labour Party history. So for me, Wilson's a big one. Of course, as well, the big sort of social liberal strain you see in the Labour Party around divorce, abortion, and so on, that's basically under his leadership. It has to be said, though, that he is really in charge of the party and the country at a time that the Keynesian settlement is in collapse. And yet he's there for so long. Like, I think that's really, really impressive in its own way. In terms of the best Labour leader, really hard. That's really, really hard. I think Jeremy Corbyn is up there. I think Jeremy Corbyn's probably up there. There's a good argument to say, you could argue Gordon Brown. I think Gordon Brown could have represented such a dramatic and quick shift away from Blairism. It never happened. You think what could have been? He wouldn't have been particularly radical. He still would have been, I think, on the centre of politics. But when you look at what preceded him, I think he could have been a really impressive Prime Minister. He never took the opportunity. He ultimately failed. They got 28% and 28.5% in a general election. So most impressive Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. Most impressive Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn.
Interesting answers. I like that. I've got a question and combo of who's asked it, which I quite like. He-Man has commented on our YouTube post earlier today, and he asks, or they ask, I don't know their gender, how is Aaron maintaining his massive guns now that gyms are closed in London? What's his tier 4 lockdown workout routine?
They don't exist anymore, Michael. It's all soft.
Oh, come on. You're being too modest.
There you go.
Yeah, Dalia, how do you maintain your guns?
I mean, I don't have any guns, but I have actually managed to do a full push-up for the first time in my life. So I'd like to have that on the record.
It's a start. Yeah, it's good.
It is
well,
a start.
Noted. Go on, Aaron. How have you? What is your gym routine this lockdown year?
Well, we're really lucky actually. We bought a cross trainer for like 120 quid the day before the first lockdown. And it's a proper one, it's one that would cost you like $2,000, $3,000. Need a bit of elbow grease, a few bolts sorted here and there, and it works really well. So probably that half an hour a day, because there's nothing else to really do. There's no, you can't do any resistance. You can do resistance exercise, but you can't really do anything serious without the sort of kit I like. But also, I'm coming to an age, Michael, now where you think, okay, well, next 15 years, statistically, it's a very decent chance you get stroke, heart disease, various kinds of cancer. And realistically, yeah, you want to do some resistance training because you keep up bone density. It's going to help with posture as you get older, all these things. But realistically, you need to be focusing on cardiac health and being on the low end of BMI. Now, I've been like 15 and a half stone and lean, but that's obese according to BMI. Of course, I was eating very healthily, but actually from the perspective of just statistically, what kind of longevity would you be looking at? It's not a wise sort of way to carry on. So next couple of years, I think I probably want to actually downsize. That wasn't a conscious objective this year at all, and I haven't. It's just, I think after your mid-30s, the idea of hypertrophy, the idea of working out to build muscle mass, I think A, it's increasingly hard, but B, that the health benefits are kind of questionable.
Interesting. What age? What was your cutoff there? 35.
I think after 35. Well, that has to be said. Okay. One of the few sports where
I'm just taking notes here.
Well, no, but one of the few sports for guys, and it is generally guys. They sort of peak can be actually late 30s, like in strongman or in Olympic lifts, because actually you're sort of peaking with testosterone production mid 30s, late 30s. So you can still do it, but obviously the cardiac elements, the anaerobic endurance capacity to sort of do it over a longer period of time, that's kind of limited. So if you're like, oh yeah, I'm doing my 1 rep max, you can do that into your late 30s, great. But you're not going to be able to work out like you did in your mid 20s.
I'm always impressed by your range, Aaron. You've got a lot a lot of information stored about a whole range of subjects. I was both impressed and convinced by that.
Yeah, I was a gym bro back in the day, Michael. I was one of those little rats that hang out in the gym 2 hours a day at university.
Ooh, act up for good with £100 super chat. Thank you so much. Very kind. Thanks for all your hard work this year and wishing you another year of growth and success. Unrelated, I have a question. If you've heard anything about the Sputnik 5 AstraZeneca joint and improved vaccine. Only I haven't looked this up actually. Maybe someone else has. I've heard that they are thinking about mixing the AstraZeneca one with the Russian Sputnik vaccine. Maybe they're in the process of trialing that. Do we review have any more information on that? It was a generous donation. I'm sorry we have failed you.
I wish I had more in return for 100 quid.
I will make sure I look that up before we next go live.
I will say there's a really great article on Wired magazine about the Russian vaccine. Really, really good, because it's something that actually was being mocked by Western journalists and politicians, particularly the media, right, for weeks, months. And actually, there's a really thorough piece of journalism from Wired magazine talking about how the Russians developed a pretty effective vaccine pretty cheaply. And yeah, recommended. Is it worth what you've just given us as a super chat? Possibly not, but it's a really good article.
I'll check that one out as well. Yeah, it's been under-discussed, hasn't it, the Russian vaccine? And there's a Chinese vaccine as well, isn't there? Do you know anything about that, Aaron? Or Dalia? We'll look it up.
I think I read somewhere, because the Chinese vaccine is being acquired a lot in Africa. I think in Egypt, like just because that's where I paid attention because a lot of my family are there. I think that that's where a lot of it is making headway there, but I don't know much about it beyond that.
I know Bolivia's just bought... Sorry, go on, Michael.
I was going to say my New Year's resolution is to be less, global north focused when it comes to following the developments when it comes to vaccines.
The Russians...
I've just made that up now. That wasn't my long term.
The Russian vaccine is, again, it's, there's a big space for them to kind of engage in this vaccine diplomacy. So Bolivia's just bought a load of Russian vaccines. We'll see. But it's interesting, you see the various political spheres of influence. Obviously sub-Saharan Africa's kind of shared, Latin America's kind of shared, the American and the British vaccines, Europe, India. Iran is developing its own vaccine, which is kind of interesting. But the downside, I shouldn't laugh, it's terrible, it means lots of people are going to die. But the downside is it's not going to be rolled out until 2022. But still, when you think that until COVID, the quickest development of any vaccine ever was months, 4 years. For a middle-income country to do that in 2 years is if it happens, is hugely impressive. But yeah, it's the race for the hearts and minds of the global South on vaccine diplomacy is between Russia and China.
Dalia, I have another question for you. Miranda Duncombe asks with a $5. Thank you very much. Happy New Year. Thank you for everything. What part can Novara play in building a broad-based social movement for change in 2021? Miranda also asks, what politicized you? You might want to blend those two questions together, but give it a go.
Okay, so the first question is easier. I think that Novara has a really, really important role to play going forward. I think the last 5 years, because of how how politics has unfolded over the past 5 years, a lot of left and progressive thinking and stuff has gotten absorbed into the Labour Party. And, we were right, I think, to give our all to that. I think it was a once in a many generation chance. And I think it will have brought a lot of people into the project. I think it would have radicalized a lot of people. So we were right to give a lot to that. I think we could have done better in building, and I think the leadership could have done better, and the project the Labour Party itself could have done better at bolstering itself and gaining its legitimacy from sites of power like the media, like think tanks, like social movements outside of Parliament. And that's part of the reason why the project failed. But I think now moving forward, now that there is still a role for parliamentary politics, but it is not as much of the frontier as it has been over the past 5 years. I think there is a lot of work to be done in highlighting and also being a real intellectual and space for progressives from a range of backgrounds and from a range of different political traditions to come together and hash out what our proposals and what our visions are going to be for the next 10 years. And we see a lot of that amazing work being done in the articles section, like a massive shout out to them. They've really been very good at continuing to have their feet on the ground when it comes to both small scale but also large scale shifts that are happening in the areas of housing activism and the areas of housing rights, of migrants' rights, of doing that kind of not only amplifying the work being done by social movements, but actually doing important investigative journalism that can then be used by and used to empower those movements. So I think looking forward, we're going to see hopefully much more of an orientation towards what does it mean to build power, both in and out, but also outside, crucially, the halls of parliamentary politics, because the left does not have the leadership anymore. The left does not have the upper hand in parliamentary politics anymore. That doesn't mean that we wash our hands of it, absolutely not. But it does mean that we need to think about what are our sources of sustainable power outside those kind of arenas. And I hope that Novara, through its articles, through its podcasts, through video, and the kind of different temporalities and time periods that those work on, are going to be a really important space for the intellectual and strategic side of that to be hashed out. So that's what I see. What politicized me? Oh God, are we going to go into that? I don't even know. It's just been so long. I just feel like I was always knew that I think I probably came in through feminism, through being like, the way that gender operates in my life is fuck shit, and I'm going to try and figure out why. I started reading Noelle Sardawi, who's like one of the most influential writers in my life, and she like takes you from I'm experiencing sexual harassment in my everyday life to like a critique of global capitalism in a really beautiful and incredible way. So I would say that that was probably one of the ways I got radicalized, but I don't have a really glamorous narrative for that, unfortunately.
Do you want to repeat that name just in case any of our audience want to look them up?
Noelle El Sardawi, Nawalelsaadawi.
One for 2021. I'm going to go through some comments. Daniel Mahoney with a tenner. Keep up the superb work. Where would we be if we had to rely on the likes of Bobby Pesto for our analysis and coverage? He's still getting briefings from Dominic Cummings. Bobby Pesto, obviously Robert Peston from ITV. So today he released an article saying Dominic Cummings was going to testify against Boris Johnson in any future public inquiry into coronavirus. It's a good story. I mean, that would be quite entertaining. We'll have to see if it happens anyway. Dominic Cummings obviously misses being the senior source, so he's still doing it outside of Downing Street. Ali Scott with 1999. I just want to thank all of you for being there all year long. You've brought so much sense and solidarity to someone who has spent most of the year alone. Much love, and please never doubt how important your voices are. Ali Scott, that's such a kind thing to say, such a kind donation. And solidarity for, many people have spent a lot of this year alone, and I think that's been really, really difficult for everyone. I mean, it's been difficult for all of us, but I mean, we've been lucky enough to speak to each other every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It's really kept me going, as well as our viewers. There's a question I've got to ask you, Aaron. Will Owens on Instagram asks, what field of engineering should I focus my studies on if I want to actually improve our world one day? And this obviously makes me think of your book. There's lots of engineering in that. Should they become asteroid miners? Should they become genetic engineers? Should they be engineering nuclear fusion? What kind of engineer should someone, or what kind of engineering should someone focus their studies on?
It's a really interesting question. And what was this chap's name again?
Oh, it's just gone. It's back. Will Owens on Instagram.
Will Owens. It's a really good question, and I think the left has to have a very different relationship to sort of STEM subjects to what it did when I was growing up as a kid. There was this division between the humanities and STEM, and if you were sort of left wing and you were intellectually curious and critical, you wouldn't do STEM, and I think that's wrong. And I think it's fantastic that now we have these people behind the BioNTech vaccine, Sarah Gilbert with AstraZeneca, and these should be the emblems of what real innovation looks like in the 21st century, right? It should not be Philip Green or Richard Branson. I think that's a really potentially powerful consequence of 2020. In terms of the sort of sectors, if I was 17, 18 and I was thinking of doing something like that myself, I think the first is low cost, scalable, modular, renewable technologies, whether it's storage, whether it's generation, whether it's insulation. You're going to have a huge market for that stuff, and I think there's going to hit a price point, particularly for the global south, where you're going to see a really rapid adoption of this stuff over the next 20, 25 years. So that's probably one. I think what's more exciting, though, and in a way, obviously, mitigating climate change is the most exciting thing of all because it's the biggest challenge we face. But when you look at some of the breakthroughs around medical technologies, particularly with mRNA, with CRISPR, with gene editing, with just basic genomics, gene sequencing, and so on, you kind of realize that, we look back at the sort of mid-19th century or the early 19th century, you don't have anesthetic, antiseptic, you don't have antibiotics, you don't have vaccines. And we think, how the hell did they live? And I really do think that once these technologies don't just, they go mainstream, they're adopted, they become mundane. I do think in 50, 60 years' time, that's how people look at us. And I think that's how they'll look at things like cancer. Oh, wow, they didn't realize somebody had cancer until they could literally see a tumor. How fucked up is that? And so I think the medical technologies and how medicine is mapping onto the dividend of exponential improvements in digital technologies is hugely exciting. But if you're involved in the sort of structural engineering stuff, the sort of physical built environment, I think has to be green technologies. And green technology doesn't have to be photovoltaic cells, wind turbines, lithium batteries. It could be material science, ultra low cost way of insulating a house and making it highly energy efficient. So I think that would be the one for me. That's probably quite a predictable answer, though.
Dalia, you have any strong engineering opinions? I was thinking that was very much an Aaron-shaped question, but
I don't have, not in the field of engineering, but a lot of my work, because when I'm not running my mouth on the internet, I'm looking at sort of work and technology and the organization of work. And so I look at a lot of platforms and how kind of those platforms are both, to what extent is technology the problem in terms of how exploitative the platform economy is, and to what extent is it a restructuring of labor relations that is simply being facilitated by technological advances. But I would completely agree with Aaron that, that this divide between the STEM and the humanities and social sciences is such an artificial and ideological disciplinary divide. In my work, I found myself like training on science and technology study methods and trying to fuse it with like cultural studies and ethnographic work in order to kind of figure out what it could mean to have a kind of platform economy that is not exploitative and is not sort of shifting the political economic balance towards, the bosses and away from workers. So I think that kind of question, I think looking at sort of platforms and platform technologies and looking at how, and not being deterministic about it, but actually using kind of the things that we learn in the humanities and the social science in order to influence and shape the world of design. I guess that's where so it's not really engineering, it's more like design that I'm kind of interested in. And that, we need far more ethnographers and cultural studies and humanities and social scientists reading STS and design and infrastructural work stuff, and far more infrastructural and design people reading social sciences and humanities. So I would say like that kind of comment on the ideology of disciplinary boundaries is really, really integral there. So I think that you're completely right, Aaron, and that we need to work to kind of take that kind of bifurcation down for sure.
This is a good one. Natalie Pearl on Instagram asks, favorite podcasts and why?
Ooh, I've got one.
Yeah, go on.
I won't say it's my favorite podcast. I listened to Novara FM probably as much as any other podcast straight away with James Butler. But I've recently been listening to The Chiefs on Monocle with Tyler Brûlé. Kind of interesting. He talks to like CEOs or, somebody who's created a new sort of newspaper in Italy. There's a newspaper called Domani, which is set up by a kind of very old Italian liberal patrician bourgeois, guy with loads of money. He spoke to the sort of the head honcho at Brompton Bikes. And it's what I like about Monocle, and I hope that Novara's work can do this in the future. It's crap. A lot of it's crap. A lot of it's the magazine, often its written copy is terrible. But what it does, it has this wonderful effect, I've said this before, of making you feel optimistic about the world. And people are doing amazing things. And so, you listen to these podcasts, think, wow, these people are doing these amazing things. They're trying innovative processes. They're doing this thing which has been done that way and this way. It's exciting. It's new. Oh, they're trialing this in Helsinki, or they're building this in Valletta or St. Petersburg. It makes you, it gives you a sense of wonder about the world. And so that's why I like that podcast, even though, it's not always politically something I agree with. It's still quite good.
Dalia, have you got one?
So the vast majority of podcasts I listen to is trash. So literally one of my favorites. But I'll start with my favorite political podcast. Obviously, Novara FM is incredible. I think it's some of the highest quality political podcasts in the UK, certainly. I've really loved Cornel West's new podcast, The Tightrope, just because Cornel West is also one of those people that has just accompanied me throughout my political journey. And every time I listen to him, I feel grounded. I feel hopeful. I feel like spiritually nourished, but also like I've intellectually gained something. His guests are always really interesting. So I really enjoyed that. And I think it strikes a really good balance of sort of strategy and real politics stuff, but also sort of the theory and the intellectual side of politics. So I really enjoy that, but I also just love Cornel West. I've also, because I've been sort of looking a lot at American politics, which I haven't looked at for a while. I've been listening to a lot of the Open Democracy documentary podcasts, which have been sort of following key issues in the US election and sort of taking the key issues like housing and healthcare and sort of really looking at it across, a cross section of political history in the US, addressing those issues. So I found that really interesting in contextualizing this kind of car crash of an election that we just had. But in terms of podcasts, I actually probably listen to a lot more. I'm a giant fan of Trashy Divorces, which basically is just this great couple who basically just go through like the famous divorces throughout history. There's like 1 million episodes, and just go through it's just like delicious gossip, delivered by a really cute couple from the US. So I love that. And I also love Scam Goddess, which is also just like deep dives into the greatest scams in human history. So I enjoy that. And so, yeah, I just love gossip and trash, really. That's what I primarily listen to be honest. So sorry to disappoint.
I want to check out all of the podcasts you've both mentioned there. Mine, I think this year have been especially the Sinica podcast, which is like an hour every week with like a China expert. The hosts are super open-minded because I just feel like everyone just talks about China in this country like they're just imposing one political system on it and saying it doesn't meet that. Everyone's vision of it is so ideological and no one's really bothered to learn anything about the country whatsoever. And it is going to be the most important country. Well, it already is, really. One of the most important. It's going to be the most important country in the world. And I do also, I just find it so fascinating because, whilst there's so many critiques one can make of the Chinese Communist Party, but one thing they did was lift 1 billion people out of poverty. And when my favorite podcast actually of the year was Aaron interviewing Vincent Bevins on his book, The Jakarta Method, which was about how there were so many social democratic movements which tried to sort of bring about the kind of, social democracy we have in this country. I mean, obviously we could have massive improvements to it here, but, democratic rights, economic rights, and were completely overthrown by the CIA or by the military in combination, mass murder, etc. So I do, I have a bit of impatience for people who just point at Cuba, China, they say dictatorship, we need regime change, without sort of having any curiosity at all as to why in ways it has worked there where it hasn't elsewhere. There are issues which have to be dealt with a respect for complexity, which I think so often in this country is not granted.
Can I come in on that? Yeah, I think if you look at CIA and regime change after 1945, and it is it's across the board. It's in Latin America. There's a big presence in Europe. It's public knowledge they interfere in Italian elections in the late 40s, early 50s, Asia, everywhere. And it's like China really is the one that got away. China is the one that got away and it wasn't destroyed by the forces of 20th century empire. That's just a fact. Now, I'm not saying that the Chinese Communist Party is wonderful. I'm not saying they do everything right. I'm not being an apologist for Tiananmen Square. What I'm saying is you've seen a country which is incredibly poor. GDP per head, China was as poor as India at the midpoint of the 20th century. It's now, by price purchasing parity, it's the largest economy in the world. By nominal GDP, it's going to be the largest economy in the world by 2028. It's alongside the US, the most technologically advanced economy in the world in terms of research and development. It's high literacy. It's got a very low infant mortality, long life expectancy. And I think you're right, Michael. Let's have some counterfactuals here. What would have happened if the CIA and regime change hadn't worked in Central America, in Iran, in Brazil, in Indonesia? We would have seen some pretty effective governments, not all of them, but some pretty effective ones. And I think that's something to really dwell on. China, I'm so happy you said that, Michael, because it's just something that it's increasingly crazy how this isn't really being discussed properly in Britain. China is going to be the world's most powerful country this century. And yet the kind of political analysis in the Anglophone world is ridiculous. It's a cliche. It's that bad.
So Sinica. I do recommend the Sinica podcast. Also, I'll say the History Hour just because I go to sleep to it every night. So it's helped me through lockdown. It's a BBC World Service documentary. Right, let's go to a few more questions. Oh, this is nice. Simran Cow with a fiver. Aaron, is your dog named after Gino De Campo? And can we see
No.
him?
No.
Which one is Gino De Campo? Is he the chef from the morning television show?
I think so, yeah.
He's
Who
the
is
one
he
that's
named after?
No, it's just Gino.
Or just Gino?
We want two. Ultimately, we want two French bulldogs, or one Staffy, one French, but probably two Frenchies. Gino and Lola.
Oh,
So that'll be, you know,
I
it's
love
kind of nice.
Staffies. They're my favourites.
Nice. Yeah, they are nice.
Yeah, I love Staffies.
Yeah. So, but Gino De Campo is the guy that who was he talking to when they said, "Oh, you could cook a carbonara sauce or whatever it was,
Yeah.
but without this?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, if my granny had will, she'd be a bike."
Yeah. Very good clip. Right. Oh, this is Greg McGregor with a fiver. How do I deselect my local MP? I'm furious he abstained on Spy Cops, and I campaigned really hard for him last year. I feel I've been cheated. It's going to be a tough one, isn't it? Who is it? Yeah, they should tell us. Well, but then maybe they want it to be on the downlight that they're thinking of deselecting them. They don't want that to be a story at the moment. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. It was a challenge when Corbyn was leader, and it will be a challenge when Keir Starmer is leader. I suppose one thing is people kind of kept their powder dry when Corbyn was leader, so now people can be more. You know, they don't have to be. Oh, I don't want to give Corbyn bad headlines. Starmer doesn't get bad headlines anyway. Right? So you actually can now try and fight really, really hard for party democracy, not really worrying that the press are going to destroy the Labour leader and their electoral chances because they treat Keir Starmer with kid gloves, as we know they do. So, I mean, on a practical level, it is, however tough it might seem, stay organised in your local CLPs, try and get positions as chair, secretary, whatever. And also, I think probably most importantly, rally around talented people in your area who you think would be better representatives in Parliament, because that's been, I mean, one of the real problems of the past 5 years. We haven't successfully built up people who could immediately, take the reins once the old guard were toppled. Aaron, it seems like you've got some thoughts on that question.
I think we did build up people. I think we did build up people. I just don't think the leadership brought them in as they should have done. I mean, I'm not particularly critical of the old leadership. I think that was one of their major failings. And ultimately, there was a carve up, as there always is, regarding candidates between political leadership and various trade unions and so on. And to an extent, that's justifiable, of course. But if you're only going to get 320, 330 MPs, and you need to run the country with these people, they need to be top people. They need to be public champions. They need to be super smart. They need to be able to go to the Bank of England and say, what's this? Let's do this differently. They need to talk to the civil service. They need to be able to communicate with the public. And I really don't think people were taking these questions seriously. It's I still find it's very perplexing, actually. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, she makes mistakes, but there are tens of thousands of people like her, tens of thousands, who, given the chance, could be outstanding public representatives in this country. And this question was never really asked. In terms of the question that this person's asked, I think, deselecting an MP, if you disagree with them politically, I think it's entirely justifiable. It is technically easier than it was before. I do think it'll be a salient issue at the next election. I do think Keir Starmer probably, to appease the Parliamentary Labour Party, will have to come out and condemn anybody who does it. What I would say is that councillors already are subject to mandatory selection, and you can get various motions passed in your CLP condemning the MP for the way they voted. And I think try and push the elected executive of the CLP and also councillors. And if councillors aren't going to back that, and this is a big thing for you and members locally, I think say, well, look, we're going to get rid of you. Because we don't think that the police should be spying on people. It shouldn't, obviously there are other considerations in electing councillors, but that should be one. So reselecting or deselecting councillors, super easy. And like you said, Michael, you need to win various roles in the local party.
There's another question which has a bit of a Adam Elmy with $4.99. Love the guys, love the work, guys. Keep it up. Why do you guys think there is such a massive lack of political talent across the political landscape? Now, I mean, that might be but I don't want to fall down on one side or the other as to whether there is a dearth of political talent. I mean, an obvious answer here, though, is that there is a bit of a lost generation when it comes to the left, and especially the left in parliamentary politics. You'll notice, in the Socialist Campaign Group, there's lots of people in their 60s and people in their 20s. And that's not to say people in between those ages don't have the same talent as everyone. I think talent is very much evenly distributed across the generations. But that, there wasn't an outlet for left-wing people in parliamentary politics for 30 years, right? So that meant there wasn't those processes where people think, oh, maybe I could be an MP, maybe I'll get the skills and the connections that one needs to become a member of Parliament. And there is a bit of a lost generation there. So, I mean, that's actually in a way a reason for hope, because it means that as people who've been politicized by Jeremy Corbyn and by the post-2008 movements, they will now start to be maturing into the age and the experience where you can seriously challenge people for power. So maybe some hope there. Dalia, any thoughts on that question? I saw some.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are a lot of incredibly talented organizers who know how to build something out of nothing, and have been able to build massive pressure with very little resources and with very little entitlement to that space in order to do that, who have been able to create some very impressive things. The problem is that I think, and I agree in a sense that I think a big problem that the Labour Party, that Corbyn's leadership had, was that they failed to identify and bring those people in to ensure that that legacy was still continued even when the leadership eventually inevitably was crushed out of government. And even if Jeremy Corbyn did make it into government, it would have been necessary to have that expertise and to have that skill within the party in order to maintain power, because they're not going to be getting their power from being coddled by the press. They're not going to be getting their power from being, favored in the civil service. They're going to have to get their power and their ability to maintain themselves through other means as well. So I think that there is a lot of talent out there, but there is still, and despite the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was leader for so many years, there's still a massive gap between a lot of that talent and the ability to feel able to walk into a institution like the Labour Party, which has always been hostile to the left and is even more hostile now. And it goes back to that thing that we raised at the beginning, that this can't be down to single individuals. Success stories like Ilhan Omar and in the US did not come just because Ilhan Omar is incredibly talented. She is incredibly talented, but it also came because there was an army of highly organized and effective people who were backing her and who can back her when she is attacked relentlessly by the right. So it's about connecting that talent. We didn't see a lot of that talent come through because of those kind of structural issues, that there was very little communication and trust between those kinds of organizers and the leadership of the Labour Party. But also that, going into the Labour Party like that, as someone from that political tradition, is incredibly hostile. And if you don't have some kind of base where you get your power and your legitimacy from, you will be eaten alive. So I think we didn't see that kind of support. And that might be partly down to the fact that here, unlike in the US, Corbyn was in a sense an unforeseen accident, whereas in the US it was kind of, they had the 4 years from when Bernie first ran to the last election, where there was sort of institutions set up in order to train and give backing and give support to those two people who were looking to become elected officials, and to give them that sort of institutional backing that meant that they could walk into that incredibly hostile space and still assert themselves and still feel like they have a right to be there.
Let's take us on a dramatically different direction. Robert Waters with a tenner. You've opened my mind this year and helped me make sense of the chaos. Thank you too for your committed viewership and your £10 on this New Year's Eve. The question is, what would all your last meals be? And in brackets, which I'm very glad for, hopefully not anytime soon. So after our long and pleasant lives, what would your last meal be? I think mine would be, if it was like a last meal before an execution, I think I'd want to be really full, because I feel like, that would make it as you want to be full. I feel more relaxed when I'm full. So I'd probably have a roast dinner because it's the kind of thing where you can just eat loads without feeling sick. Spaghetti carbonara are very nice, but if you have as much of that as you can eat, then afterwards you feel a bit sick. I feel like a roast dinner, I could get there. I'm full. Obviously, horrible situation, but at least my appetite would have been.
I like to think that this is more like I've lived for like 95 years. I've achieved everything that I've wanted to achieve. I've seen, a transition to a globally just, just transition, etc. I think either it would be like a proper greasy full English, or it would be a molokhaya, which is like an Egyptian soup with like some fried chicken on the side.
Yeah, maybe actually it doesn't have to be on death row. It could be like a kebab outside Dignitas. Maybe you've reached a certain age where you
surrounded by your loved ones outside of the kebab house.
Exactly. Yeah, like some mezze. Aaron, what would your last meal be?
It would either be pesto genovese with pappardelle, or it would be...
You'll have to translate that. I'm sorry.
Green pesto, fresh green pesto, pine nuts, olive oil, parmesan, basil, with thick tagliatelle, or an Alfredo, which is actually it's an American thing. Alfredo, which is with truffles, so cream, butter, pappardelle, and some truffle oil. That would be the way to go, I think.
Yeah, death by eating. Maybe you have so much of it. Right. Let's go for Maddie White on Instagram asks, favorite Tysky sour you have done? I'll go to both of you first, and then I'll go for that. You have less to choose from because I've been on all of them apart from two, I think.
I really liked the one that we did with David Adler. That was a really hopeful, nice one on Bolivia and after the Bolivian elections. So that was probably... And it was really cool to have David there. I think my audio was fucking up, so probably not the best one. But in terms of content, in terms of how happy I personally was in myself, that one, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that was one of those ones where we had a show where there was surprisingly two good news stories, and they were both political. So it was the Jacinda Ardern getting elected with it's not necessarily all of our politics, but she's on the centre left, a huge overwhelming majority. She dealt very well with COVID-19, and then also the Mass Party winning in Bolivia after essentially an attempted coup 12 months earlier. Aaron, and we had David Adler live from Bolivia, which was really nice.
That's very good. I think for me, it has to be the one we did on the evening that Jeremy Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party, because we were giving a perspective, we were giving voice to a perspective that you really couldn't find anywhere else. And I think that night we had sort of like 6,000, 7,000 people watching live. And there are moments when you realise, Novara is... There's nothing unique about our politics. Millions of people hold the political commitments we do. There's just very few outlets out there which are actually taking them to a mass audience. So that for me was the big one. A, because it allowed us to say things that you weren't hearing anywhere else, but also it kind of confirmed my faith in the project more broadly.
I think that's really good. Yeah, it was so nice seeing all of those thousands of people tune in at what was such a sort of crucial and worrying political moment. I think I'll go with the one that's called herd immunity. It was sort of at the start of the pandemic where myself and Aaron were basically sort of working through all of these new concepts which we were being, talked to about via experts and politicians about herd immunity, etc. And almost, at the beginning of that pandemic, there was sort of an idea, should we always get on epidemiologists? Obviously, we're not qualified to talk about these particular issues. Should we basically take a step back and let the experts speak? Which we did do, many times. We got Bill Hanaj on, professor from Harvard, people from the NHS frontline. But also, I did quite like the fact that I think that episode really gave us the confidence to basically say, actually, we might not be experts in this, but we can work out what the hell is going on and form opinions about it. And I feel like that has been something which we've done throughout the pandemic, which has been, very interesting for myself. And I think also, quite effective in terms of a type of journalism where you are really getting a grip of a new discipline, which isn't necessarily your own, but which is basically essential to get on top of for the following 12 months. So I feel like that show was where we really got confidence talking about these issues, which I think has sort of served us quite well since then. It was also, just very interesting. One of the things I've loved about this pandemic is getting, expertise about a whole new topic. Obviously, it's been a terrible year. This doesn't make up for that. But as a journalist, it's been, quite fulfilling. This was not made with 10 euros asks. Thanks for the great work this year. Amid all the misery this year, what were the events that gave you all the most hope for the future? Lovely question. Who wants to go first?
I've got some answers, but Dalia can go first. I mean,
no, you go first.
Well, Dalia's got a thinking face on, so you go first if you've got some ready.
Okay. Okay. So in 2019, a lady in Mississippi, 34-year-old lady, had sickle cell anemia. She was treated with an experimental gene therapy, and she has barely any symptoms now. She's cured. That's not the correct word you would want to use, but effectively her symptoms have broadly disappeared or entirely disappeared. And there were cells that were examined from her bone marrow, and effectively the edited cells are still there today, or earlier this in the summer, I believe it was. And that was a great news story because it said this experimental gene therapy for sickle cell, which is an inherited condition which affects millions of people. Actually, we could probably do something about that. So that was one story. Another was, and I only found this out quite recently, is that the NHS will be using liquid biopsies, or will be piloting liquid biopsies for cancer next year. So again, the possibility of being able to detect cancer far earlier than we presently can. So I think there were some really amazing news stories. And then finally, we talked to a CEO of a cellular agriculture company, Finless Foods. We got him on, Mike Selden. I think the news from Singapore about the creation of a regulatory framework to eat cultured meat, and that'll be for next year. I think that was big news too. So you look at some of the breakthroughs. Yes, the creation of the vaccine, that has to be one of the big stories of the year, really. The first vaccine, the Moderna vaccine is designed, or one of the Moderna vaccines is designed within 2 days of the genome of COVID-19 being sequenced. Within 2 days, you get a vaccine which is designed. You're seeing an experimental treatment which is successful. You're seeing the creation of meat without animals, and you're seeing quite soon, the trialing of early stage detection diagnostics tools for cancer. So in many ways, the future is bright. We have the tools to build a very equal, fair, prosperous society, and it's about creating the politics fit for it.
Very interesting answer. Dalia, have you got one? You found some hope in the cesspit of 2020.
I dug deep into my soul to look for a shred of hope, and I found some. So I would say, some of the most obvious one is, I think, some of the demands and thinking that came out as a result of the sort of Black Lives Matter protests that happened globally, not just in the global north, but globally, and also in the geography of it in terms of mobilizing multiracial people, like multiracial groups within, small towns and, small remote areas in parts of, the US and Europe that are considered to be the kind of white areas, predominantly white areas, or like home of a sort of more more racist, divisive politics, and seeing it have that resonate in that way in those kind of areas with the younger generation, and the literacy that so many of that younger generation have in issues like racial capitalism, in issues like prisons. And especially it was incredible to see in two ways. It was incredible to see in the sense that so many demands, abolitionist demands, like defunding the police, like completely rethinking the idea of what it means to create a safe community in a safe world. These kind of demands emerging and this kind of thinking being taken seriously. Now, obviously, we're seeing a big backlash to that now from the right wing and from liberals, but that doesn't mean that the ideas haven't really taken hold, which is sort of, reaching a level, that I didn't think was going to be feasible in my lifetime. You know, we've heard about local city councils in Minneapolis, etc., declaring that they are seriously looking at the idea of defunding the police and looking at alternative ideas of ways of creating safety and community security. And I think that the fact that, so there's that kind of creative thinking that I think has really inspired me and makes me feel like the younger generation are way more literate in a lot of this stuff and the connections between class and race and capitalism than we are and those above us are. And also that same generation have virulently rejected the disgusting liberal specter of representation politics. And we saw that in, huge backlash and huge campaign against people like Priti Patel, people like Sajid Javid, and saying, sorry, but being a brown face is no replacement for having a radical Black politics. And I think we've lost that for so long. And, the generations above mine, really settled for that. And I think that we're seeing that break down quite significantly. So I think for me that was really inspiring and really powerful to see that kind of intellectual and strategic literacy coming amongst that younger generation of political activists. The problem is that, we need to really harness that and we need to make it sustainable. But I think that we're seeing a new wave of how people really understand and theorize the world, which is quite exciting. So, yeah, it's probably mine.
Very interesting. I'm going to go for one that's very speculative because I'm not that confident it's going to end up well. But I suppose the moment where I was quite excited about political possibilities was in those first couple of months of the pandemic. And, people mock the people clapping on their doorsteps. And I think quite rightly, NHS staff are now, fuming that people clapped for them in those 2 months. And now the government have been incredibly slow to take any of the measures which would have been required, that they don't have to go through the same, hellish situation again 8 months later. I think they have every right to be furious about that. And from what I've heard, they are. But I do also think that at the start of the pandemic, there was, you could see the possibility of a more humane society. Remember, I think 750,000 people signed up to be volunteers to help people in their community survive the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, our government was way too incompetent to do anything about it. So they said, we're aiming for 250,000 people. They signed up. They said, we're aiming for 750,000 people. They signed up. And no one ever heard back from them because they were like, actually, we're not very imaginative and we're not going to do anything with that, even though they had sort of ended up leaving people who were shielding for months and months with, very little social contact, very little social support. You had schools, the whole Department of Education, which, could have utilized those 750,000 volunteers to try and, have a more imaginative education system whereby you had a smaller class who were in the classroom and then you had people helping out, looking after the kids outside, whatever. The government completely failed. And these have ended up being basically empty symbols because they didn't amount to anything because of the government. But I think the fact that at the beginning of this pandemic, you did have people every week out clapping for the NHS, not just to show their own virtue, but because they genuinely were thinking about, the people who were putting their lives on the line to keep us all safe. And the fact that you had, 750,000 people sign up for that voluntary service. Again, I don't think that was just virtue signaling. I think people really do want to, work together to build a better world. And, the government has kind of snuffed that out, probably intentionally. The Labour Party hasn't really done anything to try and build on that because they're too obsessed with the only thing we want to say is the government's incompetent. We can't say anything political. So I'm hopeful about the possibilities that showed, even if they haven't amounted to much yet. I think that will be the political project in terms of domestic policy over the next year or so. We were planning to end about 8, but we're going to end on one final question, which is Toby Knott on Instagram, who asks, plans for 2021?
Oh, God, I don't know.
That's the hardest question of all.
Yeah, I think I spent so long trying to figure out how to survive 2020 that I haven't even thought about 2021. But I think I'm sort of want to try and take a bit of a breather from sort of the everyday, outside of Tisky Sour, obviously I will still continue doing that, but sort of take a bit of a breather out of the sort of the fast-paced everyday daily politics stuff and sort of go back into my work on tech and work and migration and stuff like that. So I think I want to get back into kind of a lot of my research and a lot of my work with workers was put on hold because of the pandemic. So I really want to get back into that and start thinking in, again, some of that, right, there's like the kind of daily defense tempo of everyday politics. And I think I want to go sort of take a bit of stock and look a bit at that more big picture stuff in my area of looking at, what could a future of work what could a different future of work look like? So that's probably what I really want to do. And go on fucking holiday. I need the sun. I haven't been at the beach for like so long, and that is not okay for someone with my constitution. So I need to get to a beach ASAP.
I think that's a problem with whatever your constitution. Aaron.
Well, I'm writing a book about demographic aging, Mortals. Hopefully that'll be out by the end of, well, it won't be out. It'll be finished by the end of next year. There's that. I think what Dalia said is actually really commendable. I've tried to do that this year. Actually not been too bad. I remember the day that Jeremy Corbyn was, the day of the EHRC report, Jeremy Corbyn was suspended. I decided, I'd read a bit of the report. I'd got a version of it the night before. I said, okay, this is not worst case scenario, some interesting things, so we'll talk about it on the show or whatever. But I was like, today I'm going to read a book. And then, of course, you can't do that because this whole thing just opens up. So, but no, I think that's a very good recommendation by Dalia. People on the left, they need to understand that this is something that we're going to be in, for 10, 15, 20 years. And to make that manageable and pleasant and fun, you're going to have to look after yourself as well. I would also say that I can't wait to go on, not holiday, but just go out, go to pubs, go see friends, travel around the country, go, my book's in fully automated luxury communisms in a few languages now, promote that, go to Spain, go to France. I mean, that's just, I do feel, and you've spoken about this a few times before, Michael, I do feel like the 2020s, it's a kind of recency bias. The last time this happened was in obviously 1919 and we had the Roaring Twenties. Maybe something similar will happen this time. I mean, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll have another pandemic. But, touch wood, we don't. But I do feel like the next couple of years, once this is kind of dealt with to some extent, I think, we could see people taking far more risks than they otherwise would, traveling more than they otherwise would, trying businesses they otherwise, would, etc. So, I want to be a part of that. I want to get blind drunk for a month. I want to travel to a few places.
Yeah, there's going to be a summer of love. I haven't worked out if it's going to be 2021 or 2022. I think it's 2021, we're going to start to see the Roaring 20s come to the fore. I can feel it myself. At the start of the first lockdown, I was like, this is great. Obviously, it was terrible what was going on in the world, but from my own personal life, I was never hungover. I was reading all the time. Very, very productive. I was like, what? I don't need to go to the pub again. I was wasting so much time and money. And by this time, you're like, I am going to the pub every weekend, every evening. Anytime someone says you want to go to the pub on the other side of London, I'll be like, yes. So I really feel like there is going to be that attitude going into the next year. As I said, I'm not sure if it's going to be wild yet. I think this summer it will be a lot of that, but kind of outside. I don't know if there'll be festivals and huge events until 2022 because we're not all going to be vaccinated, and the outbreak at Glastonbury is going to be a bit like, would that be weird? So as soon as we can, let rip, I think we'll all be doing that. But also, the other thing I'm looking forward to in 2021 is continuing to build Novara Media, continuing to build Tisky Sour. It's been such a joy. I mean, it's been the silver lining of this year that Tisky Sour, I think, has gone from strength to strength. Our viewers have been so committed. Love your comments, love your donations. And, it has been going from strength to strength with Aaron, Dalia and Ash. So we'll be doing more of that and building the organization at every level with your kind support. You knew that was coming, didn't you? So if you do want to help Novara Media grow in 2022, go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month because we have big, big plans. I'm going to let you two both get off now. Any final thoughts before we end this NYE Q&A, your last opportunity to speak to Novara's wonderful viewers before 2021.
Just that you guys have been, I know that you guys always say that like having Tiski and all of that regularly really helps you through a really difficult year. It's also really helped me through a difficult year to log on every Friday and, and see in the comments, some of the regulars, some newbies, people vibesing, people talking, people engaging in the comments. Like it's just been, it really has felt like I built up a little bit of a community through that in a year where it's been really hard to feel that sense of community. So thank you guys so much for your commitment and your curiosity and your hope in the idea that talking about this stuff and having this faith in what has been such a shitty year for so many reasons is still really important. I find that really inspiring. So thank you guys so much.
Oh, I'm going to get teary.
Moved. Yeah. I guess I would say, Michael, obviously Happy New Year to everybody. I do feel like, the Novara Christmas Party 2021, it's possible. And I think we had one a few years ago. It was about 500 people. Why not 1,000 in December 2021? I think that'd be really fun. Those are the things that we can look forward to. And I think it's right to say that, Novara's got big plans for next year. Not just YouTube, not just Tiski Sour, with articles covering things we've not really covered, analysis, investigative reporting, really expanding the footprint of the organization. And I think that's exciting. I think in a way, the end of the Corbyn leadership, a different kind of relationship to the Labour Party, I think in a way could be very, very productive, because ultimately, and Dalia said this, you said it, Michael, these are the default ideas for most people under 45, and actually for many people as well beyond that. I don't want to be interpreted here as ageist, but the point is there is clearly a groundswell of viewing these ideas in a very different way over the last 10 years. And I think that's only going to intensify. And I think Novara Media in Britain can be at the centre of that. So it's very exciting. I think we get to the other end of this, and I think there's a great deal to be hopeful about for the left.
I'm glad we did closing remarks. Aaron Bastani, Dalia, Gebrial, it's been an absolute joy spending an hour or so on New Year's Eve with you both. Enjoy I suppose it's going to be a very low-key New Year's Eve. Thank you for all of your fantastic questions and for joining us on New Year's Eve. Again, I hope you enjoy a quiet, unusual New Year's Eve, presumably relaxing, I suppose. That's probably the best we can ask for. But for now, you've been watching Novara Media Q&A on Novara Media, of course. Happy New Year. Good night.